My only complaint with Crime Scene Scotland Forensic Squad is that it's not long enough. This series is only a three-parter. I don't know why it was so short. I don't believe it was ever commissioned for a second series, which is a shame because I absolutely love this and I have a lot of thoughts about this. I will not spoil it. So if you haven't seen any of the 3 episodes yet, they're about an hour each. If you haven't seen them, you're free to watch them. I will not spoil the cases in any detail, I promise. I will say, however, that some of the accents are quite strong. Being Scottish myself, not really a problem. But if you are perhaps not overly familiar with the Scottish accent, maybe put the subtitles on for some of them. But for the most part, I think you'll have no issue with watching it. So, this, obviously, as the title suggests, looks at forensics and how forensic is used to solve cases, primarily in Scotland. And as far as BBC documentary series goes, I think it's very, very good. So we have several cases. As I said, I won't say exactly what they are, but we have. They're all murder. They're all murder cases. One of them is a targeted hit. One of them is really heartbreaking. Somebody who was just murdered for absolutely no reason. They didn't even know the person. That really affected me. But the way they identified the killer, I think this was the second episode, the way they identified the murderers was really interesting. And I can't really say what it is because I don't want to spoil it, but they found one thing and the other thing was on the victim. That's all I'll say. But I thought that was really fascinating, a really interesting way they did that. And the third one, the third episode was easily the most brutal in terms of the way the murder was carried out. I don't think it was the most intricate in terms of finding out who did it, but certainly the description of what was done is very detailed, and you get a really good look at how they carried that out, or how they would have carried that out, and how they began to identify different bits and pieces, and how they could confirm that it was all interlinked. I don't know if that makes sense if you haven't seen it, but when you watch it, I'm sure you'll know what I mean by interlinked. What's particularly terrifying about that is that that was filmed in Arbroath. I'm from Aberdeen, very near Arbroath, so that was a little bit intimidating. The main thing with this documentary, unlike a lot of true crime documentaries, is that it's not so much about the people. Obviously, it looks into the background of the victims a little bit, but it's more so about just what their life was like at that moment. You don't really get much of their, their childhood or their familial backgrounds. You get a little look at their relationship to the suspect or lack thereof. But it's not so much about the person or why this crime was committed. It obviously does confirm that if they have the reasons, but it's more so about how they solved the crime, of course. And now this documentary is actually a little bit old now. I'm not entirely sure. I think 2013, so this is 7 years old, and forensics have moved on a lot even since then, but it's still pretty relevant and really fascinating. It looks at how they used tire treads to confirm whether a vehicle was somewhere. There's a lot of blood pattern analysis. I will say that there are a lot of bloody images. You do get crime scene photos. Were there any scenes of actual bodies? I think there was one. In fact, no, I don't think there was any picture of a body. You will see images of heavily bloodied clothing, though, which is pretty intense. So it's not for you if you have a weak stomach. We have some interviews with forensic pathologists, crime scene investigators, scene of crime officers, and they talk about, not just when they found the body or when the body was called in, but the emotional process that they go through when they get a bit of evidence or when they think they can have a DNA match and nothing comes back. And it actually looks at how it affects them as well, which I think is unique because true crime documentaries rarely look at how the police and forensic departments are affected, and they're people too. So I actually think it did very well to kind of portray that. But for me, obviously, the main highlight is just seeing all these. It sounds horrible when I say it, but seeing all the crime scene photos because it's so fascinating and watching the very obvious mistakes that a lot of these suspects made. It's so fascinating. It's so well done. I think the 3 episodes are different enough that it's not repetitive. They don't just have the same the same approaches with each one, although there are a few links across the 3 episodes. So I do say watch them in order if you haven't seen it. Honestly, truly loved it. I hope there's a second series at some point, given the fact that this was 2013, and at that point it wasn't even Police Scotland. At that point, each area had its own police department, and then they later became merged as just one giant Police Scotland, which makes perfect sense because they can thereafter share facilities, and there's a lot more. It's a lot easier for cases that stretch across the entire country. Loved it, absolutely loved it. Check it out. At the time of recording this, it is on BBC iPlayer. I promise you will not be disappointed if you love true crime. So insightful, really fascinating. The people that were interviewed were really interesting to listen to. They definitely knew their stuff. The graphic scenes and the crime scene photos were brilliant. I wish there'd been more crime scene photos from the 3rd episode, but due to the sensitive nature of that case, it's obvious why there wasn't. Personally, absolutely love Crime Scene Scotland. I promise you will too.